Yeah, hi guys. Let's start with this question that is given to us. So we can see here we are given array, and what we need to do, we need to find out those elements who have more than three votes. If we try to read the question, we can see we need to return those elements who have more than one third of the votes. So how can we find it out? We can see here that total 12 elements are given to you, and you look at 5 and 6, we can see this that the frequency, or basically the number of times these elements are present, it is more than 12 divided by 3, which is 4. So I think the question is clear. If you try to read it for this test case and this test case, you will be able to see this that here all the elements, they are present one time, which means there is no element that is present more than n by 3 times. So what do you think how it can be done? So I'll suggest you pause this video, try to think of multiple approaches, and then you can come to this particular solution. So let's see the first approach that comes to our mind. We can see this that since we have an array here and we need to find out how many times the element is present. So it gives rise to frequency. And I think you have already heard of this term frequency, that how many times the element is present. So what we could have done is we could have used any data structure, like you could have used a data structure like map. If you see here the constraints as well, the elements are negative. So I'm not sure if you are aware of this approach, that there is something called as frequency array, but we will not be using that because it is valid only for what? It is valid only for positive numbers. But here we can see negative numbers are also given. Now what I'll do is I'll try to use a map data structure and I'll find out how many times an element is present. And but if you see here, the constraints are also given that we need to use big of 1 space complexity, which means that if I store all elements inside a map, then what will happen? We can see this that we are actually using big O of n space because all the elements you are storing in a map which is not required. So let's try to see the main approach or the most intuitive approach that we can use. You could have done it with this particular way also, that you could have sorted this array and then used a two-pointer approach in order to find out frequency of an element. Even that would have worked out, but you can see in while sorting the array, the time complexity will be n log n. Even that approach won't work, right? Correct. So the most optimal approach will be using Moore's algorithm. So let's try to see that. First of all, we'll try to see a easy version of this question, like just to understand the intuition. We can see here that if I give you this particular array and I ask you find out that element that is having majority of the votes. So if you try to see here, right, what thing will happen? We can see that the first element, it is 2. So initially if we see only this part of the array, that will be the maximum element. So what I can do is I can take a counter that will count how many times this element is present, and I'll take a number as x, which is storing the current majority element. So if we see only this part of the array, you can see this that the first element will be like the element will be 2 and it is present one time. As soon as we go to the next position, we see here again 2 is present, which means that this element, the current element, let's suppose that if I write it as y, we can say x is equal to y. So I can say I'll increase the value of count. So we can see what will be the updated value of count. The updated value of count will be 2 here. Once we have seen this, that we go to the next element. Now you can clearly see that y and x, they are different. So since they are different, what I can do is I can decrease the value of count. So are you able to understand what I'm trying to do? Basically, as soon as a different element comes, the vote of this particular element decreases. That if we see in this particular array, these both elements cancel each other, and this is the majority element that is present. Are you able to understand this? That votes of these will cancel each other. Now we can see that this particular value, it will become what? It will become 1. Until now, x is 2 only. Now I'll again try to go forward. We can see this part that we get 1. So if you look at this part of the array, right, there are equal elements who have equal number of votes. Like this 1 and this 2, they both have 2 votes exactly. So you will see this that x is not equal to y in this particular case. So what will happen? We will see this that this value will decrease and this value will become as 0. Now, as soon as we go here, as soon as this value becomes 0, we'll see a change will happen. Once you go to a next element and you see now that the frequency or the C value is 0, what do you think I'll try to do? I'll see this that since this value is 0, I'll update it. I'll update the value of X as well. I'll update the value of C here as well. And what will be these values? We can see this that the values will be C value will become as 1 and X value will become as the current Y value, which is also 1. So if you look at this particular array, right, these elements have cancelled each other and the majority element is 1. Correct? So you can see this, right? Every time the sub part of the array, or you can see this part of the array, we are always having the majority element. As soon as 2 will be coming again, 1, we will see what thing will happen. You will see this that this 2, as soon as it comes, there will be a change that will be happening, that we will decrease the frequency since X and Y, they are not equal. If I point Y to this position, you can see X and Y, they are not matching. So I'll decrease it again. So you can say this will become 0 and we can see X value. As of now, it is pointing to 1 only. Same way, if you see this part of the array, which is the majority element, we can see 1 is present 3 times and 2 is also present 3 times, which means what? That there is no such change that is there. As soon as we go to the next element, that is 2. So you can see again C value was 0. Since it is 0, we will say this that the current element, which is Y, we will set it to what? We will set it to, we will set actually the value of X. So we will set here X value as Y, which is denoting the current element for us. So we see count value will also be updated. It will become as 1 and X value will update as 2. So if you see in this diagram or in this particular example, you can see here that which is the majority element. The majority element is actually 2 in this case. So you can see what is actually happening. We can see that elements, they are able to cancel each other. As soon as there are equal number of votes, we see there will be a change that will be happening. Like if you see till here, two elements are present. As soon as one element is coming here, what do you think will change? There will be a scenario that this will overcome and this will get maximum number of votes. As soon as we look in this particular array, we will see this that since this is present more times, this is present more times, this will overtake and one will be removed. So this is a first scenario in which we see that there is only one majority element. Correct? Now, based on this approach only, right, we'll try to see the next part, which is for second majority element. So let's try it down. Let's start with this part, that in this case, in this example, we'll try to take two variables. So the first variable will be, let's take C1 and let's take X1. Then we can take C2 and X2. So I am taking two variables as I was taking in the previous question, and now I'll try to calculate. So if you try to see here, initially we will see that this particular value is what? Like since this 2 is coming here, right? We can see to this particular part that we start off with this as Y. Initially, these values are 0 and these values you can assume at -1 or -1, even that thing will work. If you see this that at the end, you don't see this that this element is having actually the majority votes, then you can return -1 as well. So there can be a edge case that once you get the majority element from here, you calculate whether it is having more than, like in this case, it will be n by 2 votes. But in this particular case, we can see if it has more than n by 3 votes or not. At the end that we will do that check. So let's start with this part. We can see we have 2 here, and this 2, it is matching with what? This 2, it is matching as of now, since C1 is already 0. So we'll set it up. We'll see this that I'll update this and this as well. C1 will be set to 1, X1 will be set to Y value. So we can see it will be what? It will be 2. So we can write this condition that if C1 is 0, this means that X1 will be equal to Y and C1 will be set to 1. Now we go to the next element. As soon as we go to the next element, we see 1 is present. So this time you will see this that this element, it is like C1 is not 0, the next condition that we can think of is if C2 is 0. So what do you think we will try to do? We will say x2 is equal to y and c2 is equal to 1. So now what will happen? We can see as of now, you are having two elements and they have equal votes and you have given them these values. We will see this that x2 will also get updated, and let's update it to 1. I think till here this makes sense. Now as soon as I go to y, we see this that since both of them, like now you need to understand here that x1 and y, x2 and y, and we can see these values, they are not same. Like x1 is not equal to y and we can see x2 is not equal to y. Since they are not equal to y, what do you think we'll try to do? We'll try to update the elements. How can we update the element? We can say here that what I'll do, I'll decrease their frequency. So I'll say I'll decrease this value to 0 and I'll decrease this value to 0. So what actually happened is these values have become 0 now. C2 and C2, C1 and C2, they have become 0, which means this that till here almost all the elements are equal. So there is no guarantee that which element can be the majority element. So basically 5 is helping us to cut the votes as of now. Now again we see a 5 element. What do you think we'll try to do? We'll see this that we'll try to update this element. We'll see that since it was 0, right, we update this condition that it will be set to 1, it will be set to 5. Again you will see this that a condition will be coming that this 5 basically, which is this particular 5, it is equal to x1 that is there. Since they both are equal, what is the meaning of this? That I can update the frequency. So what I'll do, I'll try to update the frequency. Again we see that we get again 5, so we will again update the frequency. So as of now you can see 3 will be here and the value here will be 5. Now you see that we have another element which is 6. Now we get a different element, so this condition won't be true, but we can see C2 was set to 0, right? So automatically what will happen, what I'll try to do, I'll try to see this that I'll update x2 as 6 and I'll update C2 as what? I'll update C2 as 1. Now what will happen? Again we can see here that we go to the next element, that is again 6. So we see x2 and this element, they are again same. We increase the frequency. You will see this frequency will be again 2. Now again you can see we will be going to the next element. Again this frequency will increase and this process will continue. And you will see that once we end the array, we will be having that the C2 is present how many times? It is present 5 times. Correct? So you can see we got two elements here. We got one element x1 as 5 and we got x2 as 6. Now it is not 100% guaranteed, right, whether they are exactly present more than n by 3 times or not. So what will be the last step? We will iterate and we will check how many times they are present. So you can see in the same array, I'll iterate. I'll check for 5 how many times it is present. I see it is present 4 times. For 6, I know that it is present 5 times. We find out the size of the array. The size of the array can be easily found out. You can see it is 12 here. And we can see the frequencies of each of them, which we have found out. It is greater than what? It is greater than the size divided by 3, which is 4. Correct? So they are present at least 4 or 5 times. So we can see, we can return it. I think this part makes sense. And in this case, the answer will be what? It will be 5 or 6. But if this condition is not satisfied, we can see for the edge case part, we will be returning -1. I think this part is clear. So just try to do it yourself as well. Try to do this dry run part over multiple cases. Try to take as many cases as you want and try to do this, right? The best intuition will come off once you start off with this example where only one element is there. And once you are able to think of this cancellation approach, right, that we try to cancel the elements that are there, then you will be able to think better. So I think this is it from the logic part. So let's try to discuss and meet up in the code part. Yeah guys, so let's start with the coding part. So as discussed, right, we can first find out the length of the array because we will need to compare whether every element it is present greater than n by 3 times or not. So how can we do it? We can see here this particular part that we can write n is equal to length of nums. So this will give me the length of the array. Once I found it out, I'll try to take some values as we were taking. So we can take one x1, which initially you can point to anything you want. Like let's suppose that x1 is 0. We can take x2 also as 0. Let's try to take c1 and c2 as well. So we can write c1 and c2. They are both having values as 0. Now we need to do the calculation part. So we need to iterate in the array. So let's try to iterate in the array. We can say for y in nums, like y will just denote the element that is there. Now what is the first condition that we can think of? We can see this, that if y it is equal to x1, what does it means? It means this particular part, that what I'll do, I'll increase the value of c1. So we can write c1 plus equal to 1. Then you can see here this part, that in the else if condition you can write elif, and we can write something like this, that if y is equal to x2 that is there, correct, then what we can do, we can write c2 plus equal to 1. So we can see if y is equal to x2, then c2 frequency will increase, or c2 value we will try to increase. The other condition could be that if c1 is 0, this means that as of now we haven't find out a good element, or all the votes have been cancelled. Then what we will do, we can say x1 will be equal to the current element, and you can set c1 also to 1. Then you can see the other condition will be that if c2 it is equal to 0, then we can write here that x2 it will be what, it will be y, and we can see c2 it will be equal to 1. I think this part is clear. Now we can say what will be the else condition, that if none condition is matching, this means that it is a completely different element, and it will try to reduce the votes of others as well. So what we will do, we can write c2 minus, like c1 we will decrease by 1, and c2 also we will decrease by 1. So once we have decreased it, what do you think we can do? Now in the next part, we can say this, that we need to validate. Like this is a step 1 where we are calculating or finding out the majority elements that are there. Once we have done this, right, we need to see for the next part. In the next part, we need to focus upon this, whether these elements they are majority elements or not. So how we will do, we will calculate their frequency. So we will write c1 comma c2 is again equal to 0 0, and we will again iterate in the array. So let's again iterate in the array, and we check this, that if y is equal to x1, then what I'll do, I'll try to increase the frequency. I'll write c1 plus equal to 1, and if we see this, that y is equal to x2, then what condition we can write down, we can write down c2 plus equal to 1. I think till here this part is clear. Now once we have calculated that, what do you think we'll see? We'll write some if condition, that if c1 it is greater than what, it is greater than n by 3. So we can calculate the value of n here. We have already done that using length part. So let's write here n by 3, and we compare it. So we need to return a final list that is there. So I can take a final result here, and I can see, I'll just add it. So I'll use the append part, and I'll just write here x1 that is coming up. Now what do you think we can write? We can do the same thing for c2 as well, that if c2 is greater than n by 3, then we can write res dot append, and we can write here x2. Once we have done that, we can see, we need to see this, that if res is empty or not. So we can see if length of res it is 0, this means that there is no majority element. In that case, I'll append here what? I'll append here -1. At the end, what we can do, we can just return the value of res. I think this part is clear. So we can see we have divided into how many parts? We have divided into the first part, where we are finding out the frequency of the elements that are there. Then we are validating whether they are present n by 3 times or not, whether they are actually majority elements or not. Then we are just writing a edge case. So let's try to run this as well. I think the compiler is slow. So yeah, we can directly try submitting as well. So you can also try this and it will work, right? So let's try to submit it also. I think it will pass all the test cases, and yeah, so let's meet up in the next video.